Hello, my dear friend, and welcome to the Spiritually Engineered Podcast, where we take a deep dive into the human experience from a spiritual perspective. Come on in, and I invite you to stay. So, this past weekend, looking back, there was a point when I was regrouping with my team on the past adventures I've had, and I found myself thinking about, or actually coming back to, as well, coming back to the spiritual theme of the month, which, if you don't know, it's magnanimity. I actually do if you're a first time new listener tuning into this episode, if you tune into the first episode of this month, I actually go into the spiritual theme of the month and give my 2 cents and insights into that energy. So if you want to learn more about that, especially that word magnanimity, I invite you to check out that episode. I won't go into a whole lot of details or anything in this one, but I did want to actually draw from the theme of the month into today's episode. Particularly, there's this one quality when it comes to magnanimity, one quality that's highly associated with that word in terms of meaning is generosity. And as of late, I've had adventures where I've been more in that generosity, where basically I've been giving more of myself in a way that really felt fulfilling to me. And so, I guess I'll just start getting into it. And so, one of the things was gift shopping for family members, but I went with my sister. And it's not often I spent time with my sister like that, where we go out, even though we're in the same household. I always find it interesting how, with the people I spend the most time with in the household, how there's just like, oh wait, we never actually go out or do stuff together. We just kind of settle for it, or just our interactions and our day-to-day stuff. Since I see my family members every single day, but to be able to actually go out and do something with my sister actually felt very fulfilling. I even remember when she told me, the day of, oh, I'm just gonna go out, go to the mall and see if I can find some gifts and stuff. And I was like, you know what? Can I join you? I had that within myself. I felt this need or pull, okay, actually, no, I want to go. I mean, I could have easily chosen other things to do, right? But I sensed this need. So we ended up going, and then just finding different cool spots to go and brainstorming some stuff, because we were also brainstorming ideas on gift ideas for our parents as well. And then, after all is said and done, after going through the experiences and shopping and finding some items, although I'm not entirely there yet as far as getting all the gifts for my close ones, it was pretty satisfying, fulfilling to just be out there, particularly, like going out with my sister. Like I said, since we're always in the household, it's one of those things that for me, it's, ever since I've been really dealing with and working through the grief process of, losing a family member, my pet bird, Luna, which I also did a podcast episode about. Feel free to check that out. It's the title of that episode is called Back Home. But ever since then, especially when transitions, life changes and stuff comes up, I'm at a place where it's really important to practice gratitude. And, particularly being grateful for having, my close loved ones in my life, and in this case, it was my sister, and really appreciating her, because she's done a lot for me in a lot of ways that, at times I feel like maybe I don't deserve, because, especially growing up and had a history of picking on her and stuff like that. I feel like there's some guilt that I can carry within myself at times. Although I'm a lot better, in a lot better place now in terms of my relationship with my sister. I'm not like, God, if I was like treating my sister how I was like when I was less mature, when I was younger, oh, that wouldn't have not be cool at all. That would be, I mean, something would happen. My sister would definitely give me a pushback for sure. As she should. Gotta have some respect and some boundaries and whatnot. But nevertheless, though, like I said, I do appreciate what she's done for me, and so that was part of my intent with just going out there with her and just let me get into this thing, because especially when it comes to even just the holiday season. In the past years, I've always been like, whatever. Like I try to treat it as any other day, and I never actually put a lot of effort on my part, as much as I don't like to admit, as far as giving gifts and stuff. Although I'm a firm believer too that gift giving shouldn't be limited to just holidays, and in fact is you know gift when you feel moved to give, you know, not when you feel like you should or supposed to. I always never liked the shoulds or supposed tos of society and other people's concepts and stuff. And really, those are things I try to be aware of as well. Like if you ever find yourself giving, right? For me, in my opinion, I think it'd be best to just make sure you're doing it from that place that you actually want to, rather than you feel like deep down you're supposed to because of other people's concepts. That doesn't make for a genuine gift giving at all. It's not genuine in my opinion. So it was a cool day. I'm super thankful for it, and I think just because of the fact that this time around, this season, I'm getting more into the gift giving. It really has given me that sense of fulfillment, right? And keep in mind, when it comes to giving, when you're giving of yourself to others, you're also giving to yourself. I am not at least at this place in at this stage in my life, at least where I'm at in my life. I don't think anybody should be giving with that sense of selflessness. Now, in some sense, there is an element of that. But I feel like when it comes to like selflessness as a way of life, I think it's terrible, because we have our relationship with ourselves. We have our own needs and wants that needs to be met. Otherwise, we'll run the risk of feeling lack of fulfillment, depression, a lot of things, all the nasty things that I'm sure you've observed in other people out there in the space, or maybe even close loved ones you have. Like those are results of not taking care of the relationship with the self. So that's why I appreciate my mentor was like, selflessness makes a good technique, but as I mentioned, but it doesn't make a good way of life, and it shouldn't be a way of life. So again, when you find yourself giving, just recognize and just tune into like what you're getting out of that. And at times it could be, right, the actual giving. Like you may not necessarily identify anything you're getting, but just the act of giving to somebody might be the thing you're getting out of it, right? And that's fine. Like there's a lot of ways to look at it, and it's not like cut and dry type of thing. It's unique to everybody. I think the main thing I want to communicate here is that when you're giving, it's kind of tying in what I mentioned earlier. You're giving with that sense of you have that desire, like you want to, like you have this deep desire to just give. No expectations, no hooks, none of that. It's authentic. Right? You're giving, and you're experiencing fulfillment in that giving. And if you experience it and you got it, that's good. But I think where because we need a contrast to really kind of get identify. If you find yourself giving and you feel exhausted, that's when you're neglecting yourself. That's when I know those are moments when I'm neglecting myself. Then that's when for me, it's a moment to like recheck myself for a second. I need to recheck. And again, it's a matter of like, again, how do I feel in that exchange, right? Because there is an exchange going on, even in the giving. There has to be an exchange, in a sense, because in a lot of ways, there's nothing's for free in life. Like there's There's this exchange. Like, think for example, right? Just to keep it in practical perspective, like when you breathing, for example, breathing isn't free. You know, when you have to use up your energy. You have to spend energy to be able to inhale the energy, to absorb that fresh oxygen, and then use energy to exhale to be able to take in new energy. Does that make sense? So I'm just mentioning from that perspective, like the energy, there's like the whole thing, nothing's for free. It's more of like on a in a subtle level in ways that people don't normally think about it. And it's not like, like, I know for me, I would always think of like, oh, yeah, nothing's for free. Well, nothing's for free. And I always thought about it in the realm of like finances, but this goes beyond that. This really is more looking at it holistically when you look at everything, including yourself, as energy. And looking like there's an exchange of energy that's happening all the time. Another way of looking at it is like there's a price for everything. Whatever you do has a price, or you could say is the action or the reaction. It happens either way. Like all these that I'm sharing I'm speaking to the mechanics here of life. You can argue about it or you can have different opinions, but in my experience, it's just like what I've come to know and what I believe is part of like universal reality, universal truth. You can't argue with universal truth. Just like gravity, for example, or like if I was at the beach, like this is me example, me resisting, right? I'm out there at the shores and I'm telling the beach, the ocean to like, all right, waves, stop going, stay still, don't go. Or I could just start doing all these things, but the waves are just going to keep ebbing and flowing, right? Just looking at the natural world, right? At least that's what I do. I look at the natural world and even just observing that has helped me understand the realities, the reality of our world in terms of how life works. It doesn't have to be rocket science. It's from that intuitive sense mixed with experiencing and just observing. It takes a certain mindset to be able to just observe and just in all things, just seeing spirituality encompassing all of life. But anyway, I feel like I've kind of gotten sidetracked here. Let's get back into, what I was talking about with that the energy of like generosity, right? So anyway, plain and simple, if all that stuff is said and done, when you're giving, there's a balanced way of giving, and that is getting that fulfillment piece from yourself, where you don't feel fulfillment or you feel exhausted or exerted. It's like when like truly giving, everybody wins. There's no like this sacrifice or anything. Those are just bad concepts that don't work. So it's just amazing, just even just examining one's own concepts, what that can do. At least that's how that's helped me change how I show up on my day to day, and even just interactions, daily interactions. So that's one part to the element of talking about generosity. And so another experience I had related to generosity, I had the opportunity to play Santa Claus at my job. There was like they had it like it was like a Santa on the trails or Trail Santa, and it's something that between me and my fellow coworkers, we kind of worked out in advance who was going to do it, and I decided to take the opportunity. I've never done it before. I never, and you know what? I thought, let me go ahead and give this opportunity a try. I'm always up for like, well, not always, but when I had the feeling for it, to just try something different and expand, and something I always try to encourage myself and challenge myself to do, because that's where a lot of the growth and fulfillment for me has really been. And so I had my colleagues help me out with like putting together the suit and everything. We had the suit, but like I had some help to be able to like put it on me, and had to get some stuffing on it so that way I can be in that hefty size. That represents the image of, what's the common image of Santa Claus, right? Big hefty guy, gentleman. And except I was like brown Santa. For context, I'm Latino, so that's why I say brown. Give a little twist. I remember like they had a moment where I spoke to one family, one kid on our when we were on this little ride with this community that we were like doing like this little collaboration with. I actually was able to speak to them in Spanish, and they lit that person up. Like, oh wow, Santa speak in Spanish, and that was a very powerful thing. And I think when the day of, funny enough, actually, the day of when I was because I was actually dealing with a cold. It was pretty rough. It was one of those colds that I never actually experienced before, in the way that it just how things played out. It's interesting. Colds are very fascinating for me. And on the day where I was actually playing Santa, I hadn't originally planned to actually do it. One of my colleagues was going to do it, but they were having issues with like discomfort in their body and stuff, and so they weren't in that state of they weren't in the right state to be able to help with this and to take on the mantle of Santa for that work shift. So that's why it was like that last minute stuff beforehand, um, where I was like, okay, I'm gonna go ahead and do it, even though I hadn't planned to, and even though, like I said, weeks in advance we had talked about it, but then that was before I got sick, where basically missed out a week of work. So there's a lot of things that was happening at this point. So I hadn't planned on it at that moment, at that time when I was just coming back. But I was like, you know what, I'm do it. And what I was thinking about in my mind. So I'm taking on this powerful symbol that means a lot of things for people. Santa Claus. It's a very powerful symbol here in our society. And I think the part of that symbol, that at least what Santa Claus represents, and I think what's the essence of Christmas, is about, like I said, the generosity, the giving. And so I knew, like, at that moment when I was like doing this, like I was getting all dressed up and whatnot, I'm like, all right, I'm gonna have to keep some good energy here, and I'm gonna have to play the role and stay with it, because I know I was gonna interact with kids uh, on that shift day, playing, Santa on the trail. Um, and so I feel like I had a responsibility. I feel like I had a responsibility spiritually to really be of service. And so, as we were going through it, like I had to, like, right, because what's cool about it, like we had all our work bikes to take, and then one of the bikes we had fashioned, we have like a little cargo bike where we put on like a chair that we strapped in with like those little ratcheting um, slack lines type webbing little thing, basically just to create like a little Santa sleigh, and the e-bike at the front was like the reindeer. We actually had like little reindeer little antlers to put on it. It was super cute. And but we had to, like, logistics wise, I had to ride my own personal work bike, and then we had to park it somewhere, and then I would go ahead and just get on my little makeshift little sleigh on the back of the cargo bike that we makeshifted into a Santa sleigh, to be able to go in the spots where we were going to interact with people and where I was going to interact, and basically, play that role as best I could. I try, I feel like, as far as like the voice of Santa, I'm not the best. I was like, ho ho. I wasn't doing it. Well, it wasn't like that. It was definitely a different voice that I can't muster up right now. But I did my best to really step into that role, especially because I was interacting with the kids. And, when it comes to the going back to the image of Santa, especially as like from the perspective of a kid, it's like that imagination, and just like, which I think is like the core. And I think it's important because for me, it's like, as I'm interacting with kids, it it invited me, but then also I feel like it asked of me to tap into my inner child, to get into that role play. And the inner child is an important part in all of us. It's a spirit. It's in each of us. We are childlike. That's how my spirit guides are. You can think of them like our spirit guides that are with us. They're with all of us here on our journey. You can think of them as like very wise children. It's a lot of wisdom. And so interacting with the kids, it really helped me tap, into my childlike part, and it felt really great. It felt really, really wholesome, you know. And so, like I said, I'm obviously like at this point, I've been like the whole role of Santa. I'm like, I'm gonna be really serious, but I was like getting into that role, like tapping into my childlike part and really keeping it light, you know. And I remember when, whether it's with the kids, like in my best Santa voice, or when we would go traveling between the different parts we would go on the trails, especially in the streets of DC, I, I would get into that, since I was riding, like even whether I was on my bike or I was on the sleigh, the makeshift sleigh, any person that I would pass, I would wave towards, and then sometimes I'd throw some ho 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 ho. I would throw some in there in the mix with people, and surprisingly, I was able to kind of keep that energy going for the most part. I wasn't. I remember my coworker was like, "How many ho ho ho's you got left in you?" I'm like, "I still got enough for the whole trip till we get back to the office." And I get a mixture of like reactions from people. Some people are just like, whatever. But even with those people, I still send them those best wishes, because we're all going through this journey, man. We all got our stuff. We all got our challenges. We're all in this school, going through our own lessons. This I understand and know. So even with the people that are not reciprocating, it's okay. I give them extra love and backing, even with that intention in my heart. You could say it's like that. To me, that's like that prayer without ceasing. And then with the people that did respond, like there are people, I made a lot of people smile that day. I even on several occasions, I think at least five, I've had 5 pictures taken. I've had people requesting pictures that, can I get a picture of you with, and there were a lot of them with kids. There were a couple that I had with adults actually that wanted to take a picture. And so that was pretty cool, like, so as I was being embodying Santa for this day, I felt like a celebrity, which makes sense because Santa Claus is a powerful icon for people, for many, many, many people, right? And I try to look at this from the spiritual, like I said, how I look at things is, I look at it with intentionality. I look at it from that spiritual point of view. I look at it from that perspective of energy. And so, it really felt super fulfilling to give of myself in this role with people, to give of myself and to just spread Christmas joy. Although I did have one moment where I had this interaction with this one parent and their child, and some words were said, and I had said some words. Looking back, I would have said it differently. And I'm purposely just kind of saying that I'm just keeping it vague here, but why I mention it, because at some point I did felt bad about it. But my colleagues were like, it's okay, it's like it's no big deal, like type of thing. And then they're right, it's like it's not a big deal. It's just one of those hiccups that happens. No big deals when mistakes happen. Especially if like, if you find yourself like, made something like that. If you didn't know any better, like how could you really be so hard on yourself? At least I have to remind myself of this, where I always can work on or have to be aware of habits and tendencies of the maze of the inner critic that would want to like find these reasons to just justify, lashing at myself, which it's not. That's not necessary. That's not the right way to have to go about it in terms of the relationship with the self. But but despite that happening, I was able to turn it back around, and really it was a good opportunity that added on to my day. Like it was great, and also up to that point, I'm like, okay, my energy felt like it dwindled significantly. I need to bring myself back up, and I did, and I did. And I think that right there was very satisfying to me. To give myself to honor myself in this moment here. Like, okay, did a good job, Al. Good work. You know, this is it. I mean, I'm the type of person that like within my own space, of course. Like I always, sometimes I use a mirror to just kind of tell myself good things and like, to acknowledge myself of the things that I've done, even especially the little things. Because how often do we do that for ourselves? Like This kind of goes back to what I was saying before. It's like we give, but it's not from that genuine, sincere place. It's not from that place of abundance, but rather scarcities or shoulds or impositions or conditions. True generosity is giving from that place of abundance, of that place of true love. And one of the key components of that is no hooks or expectations. I give to you, and I know what I'm getting out of that in my giving to you. I'm giving to myself as I give to you. I give to you as I give to myself. That right there is what happens when there's that place where there's that balance in all that. Everything in balance, everything in moderation, right? Always. May sound like a cliche or like a broken record, but hey, man, that's how I feel like universal wisdom be sounding like at times, like a broken record. But hello, it's timeless. It's always going to be. But in time, people will understand and come to appreciate it, and wherever they are, it's like it's no biggie. It's all right, I mean, I guess it's a good thing there are cliches or it's like gets repeated, but in people's timings, people will come to understand more and appreciate and really take in those life lessons, that'll fuel their growth, type of thing. But yeah, so back to the whole Santa thing. Like, it was a lot of fun, and honestly, I never thought if you would ask me like a month ago if I was gonna be doing this, I would have been like, huh, interesting. I wouldn't have like believed it, but like I said, I'm glad I did. Let me see here. Sorry, I just want to check my notes real quick. Um, Sorry about that. Where is my notes here? Yeah, so I'm glad I did because to get to the more spiritual part of it, why I think it's essential to look at it from the spiritual perspective. Imagine yourself like a cup of water. And you have to understand too, it's like there's this saying that I'm going to share to you that was shared with me. You get out of life what you put into it. No more, no less. And there's another reason why I feel like when you're truly giving, you're really in that true generosity. You give something in return, not out of from that necessarily out of that person that you gave to. It doesn't have to, right? But it's like that talking about when I mentioned the exchange, right? You get out of life what you put into it. So the cup of water. It's important that I know for myself, what I've understood about my needs is that I need to really give of myself, and that I see the analogy of like pouring a cup of water, because it is in doing that that allows me to receive fresh insights. I can receive more from the universe. Think about the law of attraction and even just attracting abundance. I think part of the ingredient of really attracting abundance is to give abundantly. Give abundantly. Again, think about what you get out of life, what you put into it. No more, no less. And it's important to do that because I think for me, how I understand that and how I see it, I just looking at water, right? When water's flowing, when we're in flow, when we're in balance, water is moving it's flowing, and so in the water is very clear. When it's not, if let's say if I'm not giving to myself, not giving to others, then I start to become stagnant. Look at water when it's not flowing. Look at like I believe like a pond, for example. Maybe even a lake, a lake as well. Water, if it stays stagnant for a while, it's going to start to eventually accumulate algae and a lot of other things, and it starts to get murky and all the nasty type of things. And this is why I believe that we're just like spiritually, we're like water. If we don't give, if we don't experience the inflow and outflow and just moving things through, receiving but then also giving, then that's when we start to experience a lot of dis-ease. And we're even at times, I believe that a lot of physical dis-ease and illnesses can manifest as a result. So that's part of the reason why I think it's important. So it's important to pour from our cup, because it's from doing that it's giving of ourselves to people. It's how we can grow and really give to ourselves. Right? I hope I'm like making it like, if you're listening to this part of the episode, I hope you're understanding why it's important to really look at how you're giving. Right? It's not the what, but how. How does it affect you? So with going back to the experience with like Santa Claus, and why that felt really fulfilling, and really getting part into really getting into why it was also important to me, why it was especially fulfilling, is because you ever heard of the holiday blues? And not even just that, even when it just comes to life in general, and when it comes to the collective and how and what happens from that, from the higher collectiveness, experiencing what happens, is generally pretty heavy. Especially when it comes to like spiritual work, it can get very heavy at times. And I think that's natural, because it can happen because part of our own evolution, spiritual evolution, we are going to experience growing pains. And those can be very heavy at times. I think that's natural and that's okay. I think where it gets a little bit, where it starts to go out of whack, is when it starts to become excessive, where it gets to that point where it starts to become suffering instead of growing pains. Unnecessary wear and tear. And that's something that I believe that each of us can tune in and feel within ourselves. That's like a personal barometer thing. You're so better when you're suffering through something, rather than like, oh no, this is just a growing pain. It takes a lot of awareness and practice, actually. But trust me, I've gone through, and I still do go through experiences where I'm kind of going through suffering myself, even though, like, why am I doing this to myself? Hey, my own learning lessons, right? I can be stubborn and hard-headed at times. I'm telling you. Not perfect here. And that's not the point. Practice and mastery, the way I see it. So things get very heavy in life. It's understandable. It's totally understandable. But here's the thing, and I mentioned it earlier. You are childlike. Your childlike part isn't heavy. My team, when I work on my guidance, or just their vibration, they're not heavy. They're working at a much higher frequency, higher vibration. They're really good. They're masterful at keeping it light, even in the midst of storms. Hell, they had to go through that when they were here on planet Earth. But through their own means and their own freedom and their own capacities, their own volition, they made it through. They graduated. Now they're here on the other. Obviously they're here, but in the spirit world, helping me out in my journey, just as much as your guides are there for you, just as much as the guides are there for your neighbors, whomever. We all have guides with us, assisting us in our journey. Right? And it's also, you are childlike. So although it gets heavy at times when the storm comes, but understand that the storm only comes, the storm only stays for a period of time. It doesn't remain. Like the storm always passes. It always passes, if that makes sense. Even, again, look at nature. Yeah, the storm can happen for a certain period of time, but it has like a start point and an end point, and then things calm down. Just like that for ourselves in our own overall state, or emotional, mental, spiritual state. We experience sometimes this ease, but it's only temporary. But what I've observed where we run into suffering is that people prolong it, feeding energy to whatever it is that's keeping them in that stress, in that storm, right? And it's amazing when I do that as a result of my programming, my habits, my tendencies, the energy patterns, my maze. It's just amazing how just all that, and if I'm not moving in a conscious way where I'm leading myself, I'm using my own freedom against me. I'm using my own freedom to keep myself in bondage. But what can really change that, especially if you find yourself in that rut, or you're kind of in that loop, the key is to come back to the childlike part, come back to simplicity. And even above all else is to keep it light. And that's why I enjoyed playing the role of Santa and why I really took that role seriously. But don't get me wrong, I took it serious, but also had fun. I had a blast. Make no mistake. I wasn't like stiff muscle, stiff back, or like rigid, like, like I wasn't just like, oh yeah, I'm Santa, you're being so serious. Like, I had to be really relaxed and having fun with it. Gotta have fun with it. And that right there is what added to people's day, and when I observed people smiling and just getting that positive feedback from people. I had to do my part. I had to kind of keep it light, because if I was being serious and heavy and all this stuff, where I started to let my personal ish move into like my interactions with people, that would not have been received the same way. No way. No way at all. Energy, my friends. Energy. And so being Santa for me really was about, like, in the energy of generosity and a giving of myself, giving of my energy, right? Being in my thrust, being in my own authentic self, in my own unique expression, enthusiastic and joyful. I was helped for those that, that I put a smile on. It helped uplifted their day by just a little bit. And I'm sure for the people across the board, it was the whole spectrum as far as like how much it impacted them. Meaning, I definitely impacted a lot in a big, significant ways, and with others, maybe in a small, tiny way. But regardless of that, it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. If I've added on to somebody's day, that's all that matters, is that elevation. And so for me, generosity can be elevating. Like I said, when it's like truly being generous and giving of myself, it's elevating for the person that's receiving and for the person that is giving. This is a situation where this is a win-win situation. And this is what I believe is the reality when I look at the world of spirit. The world of spirit is win-win. The kingdom of heaven, win-win. But all these earthly concepts and ideas and stuff, and a mixture of all the things, people's backgrounds, all our conditionings and all this stuff, that traumas and all this stuff, all that puts a wedge between us and what's available and what's accessible to each of us to be successful. And all of us can be successful. If you're listening to this, you probably are succeeding in ways that perhaps you may not see. I remember when I asked my guidance that I've gotten some pretty good insights there, and it really did put things in perspective for me. And so that to me right there is always going to be very important in life, especially as a spiritual seeker such as yours truly, is to always keep it light. Or when life gets heavy and when the storms come through, to come back to that place of lightness, to come back to the kingdom of heaven within. And I think that takes practice. That takes a lot of practice, but it also takes examining. For me, it also required me to examine my belief systems and to evaluate myself and to check myself, to regroup myself. That's why this is part of why I think it's important to develop a meditative reflective practice. Because from that is doing those tweaks so that I can be more consistently living my best life and claiming the best life that's there for me, as much as I know it's available to everybody else. It doesn't matter who they are, their status, their belief, their orientation. It doesn't matter. Our life is there for us. And if you don't believe that, if I were you, I would ask, who the hell is that? Because that's not you. That's not the reality of spirit. The reality of, even just being out in source. It's not the reality. That's why for me, I've always been a believer of checking your concepts and just taking that step back and having that awareness, because be amazed at what you can find. And I'm sure if you're listening to this, you probably have some reflective practice that you do. Maybe perhaps you can relate to some of the stuff that I shared so far. But I'm sharing this in consideration that if someone who perhaps don't do that or don't have much reflective practice, speaking to those people, so just to have, consideration and to set time for, because it's part of the key to I think to unlocking one's own personal success in life. It's looking within. Doesn't get more simple than that. And so, yeah. So this month has been really great. I've been really getting a lot out of the generosity, and yeah, true generosity. That's what I think about. Really, like what is constitutes generosity, and I won't say it again. I mean, I already mentioned it at various points, but you get the picture. But just I think it's important to just recognize that. Okay, am I giving? Am I being generous, or the other side of the coin to kind of to gauge yourself, or am I being a servant? Because that's where we can run into issues, or at least I know I can, where I leave myself out, is that vibration of a servant. And that's the vibration that I would caution people to steer clear of, because nobody wins in that situation. If one person loses, everybody loses, type of thing. So I honestly care all about that win-win, and I know it's possible and it's doable, and I practice it in all my encounters and all my endeavors as best I can, right? While giving myself grace when I mess up. It happens. It's the point of life. But as long as, like, I know for me, as long as I'm like in that practice of refinement, those little tiny steps, those little tiny refinements, it's a big win. So to wrap up this episode, I want you to just tune into that energy of magnanimity and just think about what are the ways that perhaps, this is something that you can use for your own meditative and reflective practices. What have been ways that you gave of yourself in a way that was generosity, towards when you gave of yourself to somebody or to a lot of people, right? And just examine like what was going on there. What did you experience in that? What was that experience like? And can you identify any moments when you were being a servant towards somebody else, whereas you were leaving yourself out? And think about how you felt in those experiences. And I'd encourage you to, in the spirit of the holidays, to, think about what are some ways you can be of service. How can you be of service to other people? Or even you can just frame it with your relationship with yourself. How can you give of yourself more to yourself, where you feel really fulfilled and really nourished and feel great? And remember how you feel. And I always, ask out when I talk to people and I work with people, is just pay attention to how you feel, because your feelings won't lie to you. Your true feelings, how you feel inside, whether it's contentment or lack of it, those are good barometers, that really tells you what's what and what's going on. And I'll say this, and and always, as you're moving through in life, no matter what situation, it's like there's a saying that my mentor he shared with me. It was like, move by wisdom, stay childlike. Move by wisdom, stay childlike. And I think no matter where you go and what situations you may find yourself down the road, and there might be some storms, I would wish for the best, right? For each and every single one person that I encounter, no matter who they are. But when through the ebbs and flows, I think keeping it light, above all else, I think is really wanted to get to the core of this episode and why all this meant so much to me is so important. Just keep it light, keep at it, you know. And I think well, there's this one quote that I want to wrap up this that to me really captures a lot of like the best way to to have a steady foundation within myself, no matter what happens in the chaos of life. It was a saying from this book, "Lighten Up." I forget the author's name, but there was the part that the author mentioned and shared was like, when the going gets tough, the tough lightens up. When the going gets tough, the tough lightens up. And if you can practice that, if that comes naturally for you, you're in a good place, my friend. And that right there is that's a measure of good resilience, truly. So this has been so. I appreciate again so much for your time for joining me at this point of the episode, uh, and I appreciate you tuning in, and I wish you the best as we continue to move on into the energy of magnanimity. Embody that energy of generosity, and allow yourself to be uplifted and elevated as you give of yourself. You give to yourself. As you give of yourself to others, you give to yourself. As you give to yourself, you give to others. So, this has been another episode of Spiritual Engineered. I'm your host, Alvin Cepeda, signing out. And as always, take care, my dear friend.